Just put a little bit of water and you roll it.
Your grandfather probably ate these 30 brain dishes without blinking an eye, but mention them today and watch people turn green. From Depression-era lunch counters to church basement potlucks, animal brains were once as common on American tables as hamburgers are now. If your family ever served brain dishes and you remember them, hit that like button and let us know in the comments which ones you tried. Breaded brains. Milanese Italian-American mothers discovered that anything properly breaded and fried golden would disappear from children's plates faster than ice cream on summer afternoons, even brains cleverly disguised as familiar veal cutlets. This ingenious technique turned the most challenging ingredient into something that looked familiar enough for picky eaters to try without resistance, complaints, or dramatic protests that could disrupt family dinner harmony. The preparation began with the freshest veal or pork brains available, cleaned thoroughly and sliced into cutlet-sized pieces that would cook evenly, without some portions becoming overcooked while others remained underdone. These slices had to be uniform thickness and completely dry to ensure the breading would stick properly during the frying process that would create the golden, crispy coating children loved. The breading station followed classic Italian technique passed down through generations: seasoned flour, beaten eggs, and fine dry breadcrumbs arranged in shallow dishes for efficient assembly line preparation that could handle multiple cutlets quickly. Each brain slice was dredged carefully through flour, dipped thoroughly in beaten egg, and coated completely with golden breadcrumbs that would create the perfect crispy coating during frying. The key was using enough good olive oil to properly fry the breaded brains without making them greasy as old rags or soggy as wet newspaper. The oil had to reach exactly the right temperature to create immediate sizzling, but not so hot that the coating burned black before the inside heated through to creamy perfection that made this dish memorable. Brain and potato hash. When hog-killing day produced more organs than any family could possibly eat, fresh, smart farm wives knew exactly how to stretch these valuable ingredients into satisfying meals that fed everyone without wasting a single scrap. Brain and potato hash used the reliable cast-iron skillet to transform surplus and scraps into hearty comfort food that stuck to hungry ribs and provided lasting satisfaction through long days of physical farm labor. The hash began with potatoes peeled and diced, small enough to cook evenly in the well-seasoned cast-iron pan that had faithfully served the family for decades through countless meals. These carefully cut potatoes went into bacon grease first, browning slowly over controlled heat until they developed perfectly crispy edges and creamy centers that would provide substantial foundation for the finished dish. While potatoes cooked to golden perfection, cleaned pork brains were crumbled into uniform small pieces and seasoned simply with salt and pepper that enhanced rather than masked their naturally mild flavor. The pieces had to be exactly the right size to cook evenly when added to the hash, preventing some from overcooking into tough bits, while others remained raw and unappetizing. When potatoes reached ideal tenderness with beautiful golden brown edges that promised perfect crispiness, the seasoned, crumbled brains went into the same pan for just enough cooking to warm through and set slightly. They needed minimal heat to add rich protein and satisfying substance to the potato base without becoming tough, rubbery, or grainy from overcooking. Onions, carefully diced and cooked until translucent and sweet, added welcome complexity and pleasing texture that made the simple hash much more interesting than plain potatoes and brains. Some families included colorful bell peppers from their kitchen gardens when available, creating attractive variety that made the dish more appealing to critical eyes and hesitant appetites. Brains in tomato sauce over rice. The preparation started with canned tomato sauce, enhanced with diced onions, minced garlic, and whatever dried herbs the cook preferred from the spice rack or fresh herbs from the kitchen garden. This flavorful sauce base could simmer gently while other dinner preparations continued, slowly developing the depth of flavor that would perfectly complement the mild brain meat without overwhelming its delicate taste. Rice, cooked separately in lightly salted water, provided the essential starchy foundation that transformed this combination into a complete, filling meal that could satisfy the entire family's hunger. The properly cooked rice absorbed the flavorful tomato sauce while providing substantial bulk that effectively stretched the expensive brain meat to serve everyone generously without anyone leaving the table still hungry. Weeknight presentations were deliberately simple but satisfying. Steaming rice, served in individual bowls and topped generously with the savory brain and tomato mixture, perhaps garnished with fresh chopped parsley or a sprinkle of grated cheese, if the family budget allowed for such small luxuries. The goal was solid nutrition and genuine satisfaction rather than impressive presentation that required extra time or expensive garnishes. This practical dish appeared regularly on dinner tables throughout America during the 1950s and early 1960s, when families were generally more willing to use economical organ meats and much less squeamish about unfamiliar ingredients that provided excellent nutrition at reasonable prices. Community cookbooks routinely treated brain recipes as completely normal family food rather than exotic curiosities that only adventurous cooks would attempt. Brain croquettes with parsley. When sophisticated 1940s hostesses wanted to impress important dinner guests with something elegant and unusual that would generate admiring conversation, perfectly prepared brain croquettes provided the ideal solution. These golden, crispy appetizers transformed the humblest available ingredients into something that looked sophisticated enough for formal company while using economical organ meat that didn't strain entertainment budgets already stretched by wartime rationing and economic uncertainty. The croquette mixture began with thoroughly cooked brains that were mashed completely smooth and carefully combined with thick, rich cream sauce made from butter, flour, and fresh milk or cream. This delicate mixture had to achieve exactly the right consistency, rich and substantial enough to hold together firmly when shaped into neat portions, but not so wet or loose that it wouldn't maintain its proper form during the crucial breading and frying process. Seasonings were kept deliberately elegant but perfectly restrained. Just white pepper for gentle heat, a subtle touch of fresh nutmeg for warmth and complexity, and perhaps some finely chopped fresh chives or parsley for appealing color and bright freshness that would please sophisticated palates accustomed to refined flavors and expert seasoning techniques. The carefully prepared mixture was chilled thoroughly in the icebox until it became firm enough to shape by hand into neat cylinders or elegant ovals with clean, attractive lines. Each individual croquette was then rolled methodically in flour, dipped completely in beaten eggs, and coated evenly with fine golden breadcrumbs that would create the perfect crispy exterior during deep frying. Deep frying required absolutely precise temperature control that separated experienced cooks from nervous beginners. The oil had to be hot enough to create immediate, vigorous bubbling around each delicate croquette, but never so hot that the golden coating burned black before the creamy interior heated through completely to serving temperature. Perfect croquettes emerged from the bubbling oil with beautiful golden brown exteriors that promised satisfying crispness and creamy, warm centers that delivered rich satisfaction in every single bite. The contrast between textures created the kind of sophisticated eating experience that impressed guests and generated compliments that hostesses treasured. Presentation elevated these simple, economical ingredients into something that genuinely looked like expensive restaurant food worthy of special occasions and important celebrations. The finished croquettes were arranged with artistic precision on delicate doilies, garnished tastefully with fresh parsley sprigs, and served with small silver forks that made them easy to handle gracefully during elegant cocktail parties where appearance mattered as much as flavor. Guests bit into these mysterious golden appetizers expecting sophisticated, complex flavors and were never disappointed by the rich, creamy results that satisfied without being too heavy or overwhelming for party food that had to please diverse tastes and dietary preferences while encouraging continued conversation and social interaction. Brains and gravy over biscuits, southern mill towns and farming communities developed their own distinctive version of the beloved biscuits and gravy combination, using readily available organ meat instead of expensive sausage to create a stick-to-your-ribs breakfast that could fuel hard-working men through long, demanding shifts in hot textile mills and tobacco fields where only the strongest workers lasted more than a few seasons. The preparation started with fresh pork brains that were cleaned thoroughly and cut into small, uniform pieces that would cook quickly and evenly in the rich gravy without creating unpleasant texture contrasts. These carefully prepared pieces had to be small enough to distribute evenly throughout the finished gravy while remaining large enough to provide substantial, satisfying bites of protein that would fuel demanding physical labor. The traditional Southern gravy began with bacon grease, heated in well-seasoned cast-iron skillets until it shimmered like liquid silk across the cooking surface. Flour was whisked in gradually to create a proper roux that would thicken the gravy, while adding the distinctive nutty flavor that made authentic Southern gravy so different from the thin cream sauces used in other regions of the country. Fresh milk, often still warm from the morning milking and rich with natural cream, was added very gradually with constant, vigorous whisking to prevent lumps while creating the rich, creamy base that would carry the tender brain pieces. Brain pieces went into the gently simmering gravy for just long enough to cook through completely without becoming tough as old shoe leather or rubbery as tire treads. Fresh buttermilk biscuits, baked until golden and flaky in the same reliable ovens that had served Southern families for generations, provided the essential foundation for this hearty breakfast that could sustain grueling physical labor for hours. The rich aroma of brain gravy bubbling in seasoned cast-iron skillets created eager anticipation that made early morning rising seem worthwhile despite the physical demands that lay ahead. Brain dumplings in broth. German and Austrian immigrants brought the time-honored tradition of delicate brain dumplings to American prairie farms, where they became an elegant Sunday soup course that honored cherished Old World customs, while successfully adapting to New World ingredients and challenging conditions that tested immigrant determination, creativity, and cultural preservation instincts. The dumpling mixture required careful combination of finely ground cooked brains with fresh breadcrumbs, beaten eggs, and just enough flour to create a workable dough that would hold together reliably during the cooking process. Traditional seasonings followed authentic German patterns that had been passed down carefully through multiple generations. Fine salt, white pepper for gentle heat, freshly grated nutmeg for warmth and complexity, and perhaps some finely chopped fresh parsley for appealing color and bright freshness that would please American-born children who might otherwise resist unfamiliar Old World flavors. The prepared dumplings were shaped carefully by experienced hands into perfectly uniform walnut-sized balls that would cook evenly in gently simmering beef or chicken broth. Clear, well-seasoned broth was absolutely essential for this dish's success and authentic flavor profile. The dumplings were added to gently simmering broth and cooked just until they floated to the surface. indicating they were done. Prairie families served brain dumpling soup as the first course of Sunday dinner, honoring German traditions while adapting to American meal patterns that differed from European customs. The soup connected families to their European heritage while using ingredients available on American farms where traditional Old World items weren't always obtainable. Pickled calf's brains. Behind every neighborhood delicatessen counter sat a mysterious glass jar that dared customers to try something truly unusual and challenging. Pickled calf's brains floated in cloudy brine like a culinary challenge that separated the adventurous from the squeamish, creating an immediate test of culinary courage for anyone brave enough to point and ask for a sample. The pickling process began with the freshest calf brains available, cleaned meticulously, and poached just until they firmed up enough to slice cleanly without falling apart into useless pieces. These brains had to be absolutely perfect. Any hint of blood or impurity would ruin the entire expensive batch and waste ingredients that couldn't be easily replaced during lean times. The pickling solution combined white vinegar, pure water, coarse salt, and traditional spices like bay leaves, black peppercorns, and sometimes a touch of fresh garlic that would enhance rather than mask the delicate brain flavor. Sliced brains went into sterilized glass jars and were covered completely with the seasoned brine, following proper canning techniques that ensured both safety and quality. Jewish delicatessens particularly specialized in pickled organ meats, including brains, tongues, and other challenging cuts that required skilled preparation and deep cultural knowledge passed down through generations. The brains were served thinly sliced on fresh rye bread with spicy mustard or chopped fine and mixed into creamy egg salad for customers who wanted to try them without confronting their appearance directly. The pickling process created flavors that were tangy, complex, and surprisingly mild to those brave enough to taste them without preconceived notions. Brains à la Polonaise wartime cookbooks promoted this elegant preparation as an ingenious way to make cheap cuts feel special enough for important company dinners when rationing severely limited ingredient choices and creative cooks had to make do with whatever was available. The brown butter, breadcrumbs, and hard-boiled eggs transformed humble brains into something that looked and tasted like expensive restaurant food worthy of honored guests. The preparation began with perfectly cooked calf or pork brains that were poached until just firm and sliced into neat, uniform portions that would present attractively on good dinner plates. Brown butter was absolutely key to this dish's success and sophistication. Fresh breadcrumbs were toasted in the fragrant brown butter until they turned golden and achieved perfect crispiness, creating textural interest that made the finished dish much more enjoyable to eat. These carefully prepared breadcrumbs absorbed the nutty butter flavors while adding satisfying crunch that contrasted beautifully with the smooth, creamy brain texture. Hard-boiled eggs, chopped fine and mixed with fresh parsley, provided appealing color and additional protein that made the dish more substantial and visually attractive. The presentation looked sophisticated enough for special occasions while using economical ingredients that didn't strain wartime budgets already stretched by rationing and shortages. Brain and mushroom, fricassee. Before frozen dinners and processed convenience foods revolutionized home cooking forever, weeknight suppers often meant practical one-pan meals that combined whatever protein was available with seasonal vegetables and simple seasonings to create something genuinely satisfying. Brain and mushroom fricassee provided exactly that perfect combination in a single, reliable skillet that simplified both cooking and cleanup for busy farm wives. The fricassee began with fresh mushrooms, carefully sliced and sautéed until they released their natural moisture and developed beautiful golden brown edges that promised rich, earthy flavors. These mushrooms provided complexity that perfectly complemented the mild brain meat while adding appealing texture and visual interest to the finished dish that made it attractive enough for family dinners. Wild mushrooms gathered from familiar woods and fields made this dish especially special during autumn months, when nature provided abundant free ingredients for families who knew where to look and which varieties were safe. Children learned to identify edible varieties, while mothers taught them which ones would add the best flavors to evening meals that had to stretch tight budgets. Cleaned brain meat was cut into uniform bite-sized pieces and added to the pan with the golden mushrooms. The cooking had to be extremely gentle and brief, just long enough to heat the brains through completely without making them tough as old leather boots or disappointingly rubbery as worn-out tire treads. The secret was perfect timing that came only from years of experience and careful attention to detail that couldn't be learned from cookbooks. Brain meat cooked much faster than most proteins, transforming from perfect tenderness to disappointing toughness in mere seconds of inattention. Farm wives developed reliable instincts about exactly when to remove the pan from heat. A simple cream sauce bound everything together harmoniously, made by adding flour to the flavorful pan drippings, then gradually whisking in rich milk or cream. This sauce captured all the concentrated flavors from the mushrooms and brains, while creating the rich, comforting base that made the dish satisfying enough for hungry working families who needed substantial meals. The cream came directly from the family cow, still warm from morning milking and naturally rich with butterfat that made store-bought dairy taste thin and watery by comparison. This farm-fresh cream created silky textures that transformed simple ingredients into something that felt luxurious, even during the leanest times when money was scarce. From Depression-era lunch counters to church basement potlucks, animal brains were once as common on American tables as hamburgers are now. If your family ever served brain dishes and you remember them, hit that like button and let us know in the comments which ones you tried. Greek Easter fried lamb brains. Greek American communities maintained sacred Easter traditions that honored every part of the Paschal lamb, including the brains that were considered precious delicacies worthy of the year's most important religious feast. These traditions connected families to ancient customs while celebrating the end of Lenten fasting with foods that represented abundance and blessing. After the ceremonial lamb roasting that brought extended families together for celebration and shared labor, the head was processed carefully to harvest the valuable brains for special preparation that honored both the sacred meal and ancestral cooking traditions that had been passed down through countless generations of Greek families. The brains were cleaned with religious care and soaked in cold water to remove any traces of blood, following dietary laws that governed proper meat preparation according to Orthodox traditions. This meticulous cleaning process was considered essential for both food safety and spiritual purity that made the feast acceptable for religious celebration. The frying technique followed traditional Greek methods that had been perfected over centuries. The cleaned brains were dredged in seasoned flour and fried in good olive oil until golden and beautifully crispy. The oil had to reach exactly the right temperature to create immediate sizzling, but remain controlled enough to cook the brains evenly without burning the delicate coating. Brain and onion sandwich on rye stockyard districts and meatpacking towns supported lunch counters that specialized in hearty sandwiches made from whatever was fresh and available that day. Brain and onion on rye became the reliable working man's special that satisfied the tremendous appetites built by grueling physical labor in environments that tested human endurance to its absolute limits. The sandwich construction started with thick slices of substantial dark rye bread that could support the weight of meat and onions without becoming soggy or falling apart in working hands that couldn't afford to waste time with delicate food. This bread provided the sturdy foundation that made the sandwich both portable and satisfying for men who had to eat quickly during brief breaks. Fresh pork brains were sliced thick and fried quickly in well-seasoned cast-iron pans until they developed beautiful golden crusts while staying creamy inside. The frying had to be fast and controlled, long enough to create appealing texture and color, but brief enough to prevent the delicate meat from becoming tough and chewy. Sweet onions were sliced thick and caramelized slowly until they turned golden and developed the mellow sweetness that balanced the rich brain meat perfectly. These carefully cooked onions provided familiar flavors and appealing texture that made the unusual protein more acceptable to workers who might otherwise be hesitant about organ meats. Sharp yellow mustard, spread generously on the rye bread, added the essential bite that cut through rich flavors while providing the moisture that bound everything together into a cohesive sandwich. The mustard was never optional. It provided the acidity that balanced all the rich elements while adding familiar flavors that made the combination work perfectly. Brains with brown butter and lemon mid-century restaurants featured this sophisticated continental preparation on their most elegant menus, proving that proper French technique could elevate even the humblest available ingredients into something truly worthy of white tablecloth presentation and sterling silver service that impressed the most discriminating diners. The dish began with the finest calf brains available, cleaned with professional care, and poached in court bouillon until they reached absolute perfection. Restaurant chefs understood that brain preparation was one of the techniques that separated true professional kitchens from amateur home cooking, requiring skill and timing that came only through years of dedicated practice. Brown butter preparation required the precise timing and temperature control that professional cooks learned through countless repetitions and careful observation. The butter had to reach the exact hazelnut color and release the perfect nutty aroma without crossing the fine line into bitter, burnt flavors that would completely ruin the delicate dish. The brains were sliced with surgical precision and warmed gently in the fragrant brown butter for just long enough to heat through and absorb some of the complex nutty flavors. This final cooking step required perfect timing and constant attention. Too long, and the brains became unacceptably tough. Too short, and they remained disappointingly cold at the center. Brains and noodles, casserole. Church bake sales and community potluck dinners featured substantial casseroles that could feed large crowds while using economical ingredients that didn't strain limited budgets. Brain and noodle casseroles provided the kind of comfort food satisfaction that made them disappear from serving tables long before more expensive dishes that required costly ingredients. The casserole construction began with wide egg noodles that were cooked until perfectly tender and drained thoroughly to prevent the finished dish from becoming watery or soggy. These substantial noodles provided the essential starchy foundation that would absorb rich flavors while creating filling texture that made the casserole satisfying enough to serve as a complete main course. Cooked brain meat was carefully mixed with the tender noodles, along with rich cream sauce made from butter, flour, and fresh milk that bound everything together into a cohesive, satisfying combination. This sauce provided the moisture and richness that made the casserole comfort food while adding flavors that complemented the mild brain meat perfectly. Mild cheddar or American cheese was layered generously throughout the casserole and sprinkled on top to create the golden, bubbly surfaces that looked so appealing and added familiar flavors that made brain meat more acceptable to cautious eaters who might otherwise be hesitant about trying organ meats. Brains and hominy. Skillet farm pantries contained reliable shelf-stable ingredients that could be combined quickly into satisfying meals when fresh ingredients were scarce or unavailable due to seasonal limitations. Brain and hominy skillets used readily available canned hominy to stretch small amounts of precious brain meat into filling suppers that could feed entire families without waste. The preparation began with canned hominy that was carefully drained and rinsed thoroughly to remove the processing liquid that could make the finished dish unpleasantly salty. This prepared hominy provided substantial bulk and mild corn flavor that complemented brain meat perfectly without competing with its delicate taste or overwhelming the dish. Brain meat was prepared carefully and cut into uniform small pieces that would distribute evenly throughout the hominy, without creating unpleasant texture contrasts. The pieces had to be exactly the right size to cook evenly when added to the skillet mixture, ensuring that some portions weren't overcooked while others remained unappetizingly raw or underdone. Diced onions, cooked slowly until they became translucent and sweet, added welcome complexity and pleasing texture that made the simple combination much more interesting than plain hominy and brains. These carefully prepared onions provided familiar flavors that made the dish more appealing to family members who might otherwise be hesitant about eating unfamiliar organ meat preparations. This liquid might be rich milk, flavorful broth, or simple water, depending on what was available and how rich the cook wanted the finished dish to taste. Simple seasonings were all that was needed: salt, black pepper, and perhaps some paprika for appealing color that made the finished dish look more attractive on plain dinner plates. The goal was straightforward comfort food that satisfied hungry families without challenging anyone's taste preferences with unfamiliar or overpowering flavors. Brains in white wine cream. Brain in white wine cream provided exactly that kind of impressive sophistication that elevated simple farm cooking into restaurant-quality cuisine. White wine was carefully reduced in the cooking pan until it concentrated into intensely flavorful syrup that would provide complex depth without overwhelming the delicate brain meat. This reduction technique was one of the hallmarks of sophisticated French cooking that separated elegant preparations from simple home-style dishes that anyone could make. Heavy cream was added gradually to the reduced wine, creating a luxurious sauce that could coat the brain pieces while providing the rich mouthfeel that made the dish feel truly special and memorable. Cream had to be perfectly fresh and rich to achieve the proper consistency and flavor that would impress discerning guests. Brain meat was warmed very gently in the wine cream sauce, just long enough to heat through completely and absorb some of the complex flavors without becoming tough or losing its delicate texture. Brains and chili scramble. Railroad cook cars and industrial cafeterias created innovative hybrid dishes that combined available ingredients with bold seasonings designed to satisfy working men who needed substantial food that traveled well and provided lasting energy for demanding physical labor that tested human endurance in harsh working conditions. And brain meat provided reliable protein that was shelf-stable enough for institutional cooking situations where fresh ingredients were impractical or impossible to obtain regularly. Generous amounts of chili powder and other bold seasonings were added to mask any unfamiliar flavors that might seem strange to workers who weren't accustomed to eating organ meats as part of their regular diet. The cooking was done quickly in large batches using industrial equipment that could feed dozens of workers during short meal breaks when time was limited. Speed and quantity mattered much more than refined technique in these institutional settings where efficiency determined success or failure. Hot sauce and additional seasonings were always available for workers who wanted even bolder flavors that would mask any remaining traces of organ meat taste. The goal was filling, flavorful food that provided energy for physical labor while using economical ingredients that kept meal costs manageable. crispy brains on saltines, VFW halls, American Legion posts, and working men's clubs served simple snacks that paired perfectly with cold beer while providing enough substance to absorb alcohol and satisfy appetites built by physical work and military service. These establishments understood their clientele and served food that met their specific needs and preferences. Brain meat was cut into small uniform pieces and fried until beautifully crispy, creating the perfect texture contrast with tender, creamy centers. Frying had to be done quickly at high temperature to achieve the ideal crispiness without overcooking the delicate meat inside that made these simple snacks so appealing. Saltine crackers provided the neutral, crunchy base that allowed the brain flavors to dominate while adding the salt and crunch that made each bite substantial and satisfying. Crackers also absorbed some of the natural oils from frying, preventing the snacks from being too greasy or overwhelming. This combination provided exactly the right proportions of salt, fat, protein, and crunch that complemented beer drinking while offering enough substance to serve as light meals during evening social hours. Snacks were filling enough to satisfy without being so heavy that they interfered with continued drinking and conversation. Brain and pea patties, PTA fundraisers, and school cafeteria meals featured economical patties that stretched expensive meat with vegetables and fillers, creating substantial portions that could feed children efficiently while providing the nutrition that growing bodies needed for learning and physical development. Patty mixture combined ground brain meat with cooked green peas, fresh breadcrumbs, and beaten eggs to create a mixture that would hold together reliably during cooking while providing complete nutrition. The proportions had to be measured carefully to achieve proper texture and binding that would create attractive, substantial patties. Green peas provided appealing color, natural sweetness, and additional protein that made the patties more nutritious while helping to stretch the expensive brain meat to feed more children. Bright green color also made the finished patties look more familiar and appealing to young diners who might otherwise be suspicious of unfamiliar ingredients. Breadcrumbs and beaten eggs worked together to bind all ingredients into cohesive patties that would maintain their shape during cooking and serving. The mixture had to achieve exactly the right consistency, moist enough to hold together firmly, but not so wet that the patties would fall apart during handling. Patties were shaped carefully by hand and pan-fried in shallow fat until they developed golden brown crusts on both sides while cooking through completely to ensure food safety. Brains with country grits. Mill towns throughout the American South developed distinctive breakfast traditions that sustained workers through long, demanding shifts in hot, humid textile factories where only the strongest workers could survive the brutal working conditions and maintain productivity levels that satisfied demanding supervisors and mill owners. The grits were prepared with fresh milk and plenty of butter until they reached the perfectly creamy consistency that could support additional ingredients without becoming too thin or watery. These carefully prepared grits provided the essential starchy foundation that made the meal substantial and filling enough to sustain manual labor. Brain meat was prepared simply and cooked gently until tender, then served alongside or mixed directly into the creamy grits. Preparation avoided complex seasonings that might overwhelm the mild corn flavor of properly prepared grits, or create unfamiliar tastes that wouldn't appeal to working families. Mill workers ate this substantial breakfast, knowing with certainty that it would sustain them through morning shifts in factory conditions that would exhaust office workers within hours. The perfect combination of carbohydrates and protein provided everything their bodies needed for sustained physical labor in challenging environments. Dishe appeared regularly on breakfast tables throughout mill communities where families understood the connection between proper nutrition and the ability to earn wages that kept families fed and housed. This wasn't just breakfast. It was fuel that made survival possible in demanding industrial environments. Rose brand pork brains in milk gravy. Grocery store shelves through the 1970s featured convenient canned brain products that promised easy preparation for families who wanted the nutrition benefits of organ meats without the complexity of working with fresh ingredients that required specialized knowledge and careful handling techniques. Rose brand became the most recognizable and trusted label for these products, offering consistent quality and reliable results that busy homemakers could depend on for quick weeknight meals. The company built its reputation on providing convenient access to traditional foods that might otherwise be difficult to obtain or prepare. And brains were fully cooked and ready to heat, making them ideal for quick weeknight meals when time was limited but nutrition couldn't be compromised. These products brought organ meat nutrition to families without access to fresh sources or the knowledge needed for proper preparation from scratch. The combination was typically served over fresh toast or warm biscuits, creating complete meals that provided substantial nutrition without requiring expensive ingredients or complicated preparation techniques. Families could have satisfying dinners ready in less than 15 minutes using ingredients from the pantry. These products disappeared from grocery shelves as consumer preferences shifted toward more conventional convenience foods that didn't challenge contemporary sensibilities about acceptable protein sources, leaving an entire generation without access to traditional organ meat nutrition. Brain and cabbage skillet, hog-killing time, brought entire communities together for shared labor and celebration, creating events that combined practical necessity with social bonding that strengthened rural communities. Brain and cabbage skillets provided hearty food that honored the sacrifice of the animal by using every valuable part without waste. Fresh brain meat was combined with sliced cabbage from late garden harvests that had been sweetened by first frosts, creating natural flavor combinations that celebrated autumn abundance. The cabbage provided bulk and nutrition that stretched the valuable organ meat to feed everyone who had contributed labor to the community butchering effort. The skillet cooking method allowed all ingredients to cook together until the cabbage wilted and sweetened while the brains heated through completely. Simple seasonings enhanced rather than masked the natural flavors: salt, pepper, and perhaps some caraway seeds that complemented both the pork and cabbage beautifully. The goal was honest food that celebrated natural ingredients rather than complex preparations that might overshadow the pure flavors of fresh, quality ingredients. The meal was served directly from cast-iron skillets, while still hot and aromatic from the cooking process, creating rustic presentations that matched the community nature of the butchering events. Each serving provided complete nutrition while honoring the sacrifice of the animal and the labor of the community. This tradition represented agricultural communities at their best: neighbors helping neighbors, nothing wasted, everyone fed, and cultural traditions maintained through shared experiences that strengthened social bonds and preserved valuable knowledge for future generations. If your family ever served brain dishes and you remember them,
Just put in a bit of water and you boil it.
your grandfather probably ate these 30 brain dishes without blinking an eye, but mention them today and watch people turn green. From Depression-era lunch counters to church basement potlucks, animal brains were once as common on American tables as hamburgers are now. Hit that like button and let us know in the comments which ones you tried. St. Louis fried brains sandwich. Walk into any tavern along the Mississippi River in 1950, and you'd find fried brains sandwich with pickles and onions on every chalkboard. This was working man's food that filled bellies after long shifts in the stockyards. The brain sandwich started with fresh pork brains from the morning's slaughter. Sliced thick and coated in seasoned flour, cast-iron skillets heated with lard until the fat shimmered. Those brains hit that hot fat with a satisfying sizzle, developing crusts that crackled when you bit through them. The inside stayed creamy and mild. Fresh Kaiser rolls were split and toasted golden, spread with yellow mustard that cut through the rich coating. Thick slices of raw onion added bite, while dill pickles provided the acid that made everything balance perfectly. Rivertown taverns served thousands of these sandwiches every week through the 1960s. Steelworkers, longshoremen, and meatpackers knew exactly which bars made them best. The tradition died with neighborhood taverns when meat processing centralized and fresh brains became harder to find. Pork brains and eggs. During the Great Depression, a can of pork brains could stretch 3 eggs into breakfast for 6 people. Farm wives and city mothers discovered this protein-rich combination that turned expensive eggs into filling meals. The technique started with heating bacon grease in cast-iron skillets until it rippled like liquid silk. Canned pork brains, drained and crumbled, went into that hot fat first, needing just enough cooking to warm through and develop slightly golden color without becoming tough. Beaten eggs poured over the warming brains created a scramble that looked familiar but tasted richer than regular eggs. The brains added creamy texture while providing protein that lasted through long workdays. Salt and pepper were often the only seasonings needed. This breakfast appeared on tables from Appalachian farms to industrial city kitchens throughout the 1930s and 1940s. Children grew up eating brain scrambles without thinking twice. It was just breakfast, like oatmeal or pancakes. The dish began disappearing in the 1950s as prosperity returned and fresh meat became more affordable. Why stretch eggs with brains when you could afford bacon or sausage? Calf's brains, meuniere. Same brown butter and caper sauce that made Dover Sole Elegant worked magic on the humblest cut from the butcher shop. Calf's brains meuniere appeared on hotel dining room menus throughout the 1940s and 1950s, proving that technique could elevate any ingredient. Preparation began with soaking fresh calf brains in cold water with vinegar to remove blood traces. French technique demanded careful handling. Brains were patted dry, then dredged lightly in seasoned flour. Clarified butter heated until it turned perfect golden amber. The brains went in gently, developing crusts that protected the creamy interior. Meuniere sauce began in the same pan. Fresh butter continued browning until it reached hazelnut color, then capers and lemon juice added the bright finish. Home cooks learned these restaurant techniques from cookbooks promising elegant entertaining on Depression-era budgets. The dish disappeared from menus in the 1970s as diners became more squeamish about organ meats. Brain fritters. Every church potluck had that mysterious tray of golden fritters that disappeared faster than desserts, but nobody admitted knowing what was inside. Grandmothers perfected these bite-sized mysteries using every scrap from hog butchering day. The secret started with grinding cooked pork brains through the finest meat grinder plate until smooth. This paste, mixed with beaten eggs, flour, and seasonings, usually salt, pepper, and sage. The fritter batter required perfect consistency, thick enough to hold together, loose enough to puff up light and airy. Cast-iron Dutch ovens filled with lard heated to exactly the right temperature. Spoonfuls of brain batter puffed up like magic, turning golden brown within minutes. Children bit into these golden treats without questioning ingredients. They tasted like seasoned, crispy comfort food that satisfied in ways store-bought appetizers never could. Tacos de sesos. These brain tacos were weekend traditions, drawing regular customers who knew when fresh batches would be ready. Preparation began before dawn with beef brains soaked in cold water, then simmered gently with bay leaves, onion, and salt. Perfectly cooked brains emerged tender enough to flake apart but firm enough for tacos, seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and cumin. Fresh corn tortillas provided foundation for flaked brains topped with chopped onion and cilantro. Green salsa made from tomatillos, jalapenos, and garlic added bright acid, balancing the rich filling perfectly. Regular customers arrived early, knowing brain tacos would sell out by noon. The creamy, seasoned brains contrasted with bright salsa and fresh tortilla, creating flavors regular meat tacos couldn't match. German club Herrensalat, Milwaukee's German social clubs, served brain salad at every gathering, preserving Old World traditions adapted to New World ingredients. This was cultural identity preserved in vinaigrette, served with rye bread and cold beer. The salad began with fresh pork brains poached in court bouillon with white wine, bay leaves, and onion. After cooling overnight, brains were sliced neatly and arranged with German precision. The vinaigrette combined German mustard, white wine vinegar, and oil with chopped hard-boiled eggs, capers, and fresh herbs. Sliced onions added sharp bite, contrasting with mild brains. Social club cooks took fierce pride in their variations while maintaining essential German character. Creamed brains on toast. This Depression-era supper looked like creamed chipped beef until you took the first bite. Brain gravy on toast provided filling comfort food, stretching tight budgets while satisfying hungry appetites. Preparation started with canned pork brains, readily available and cheaper than most proteins. Cream gravy began with butter melted until foamy, flour whisked in for smooth roux, then milk added gradually creating velvety base. Drained brains folded gently into hot cream sauce, heated through without overcooking. Toast from thick white bread slices provided sturdy foundation. Seasoning stayed simple. Salt, white pepper, perhaps paprika for color. These brain dishes disappeared as prosperity changed expectations and convenience foods offered easier alternatives. They represented eras when home cooks used every part of the animal, creating meals that honored both tradition and practical necessity, while keeping families fed and satisfied. Lamb brains with eggs. Austrian immigrants brought this hearty breakfast to Midwest farms, using every scrap from spring lamb butchering, while providing protein that sustained families through long days of physical labor. Fresh lamb brains were cleaned and soaked in cold water to remove blood. Farm wives understood proper preparation made the difference between something the family would eat and leftovers for the pigs. The brains were poached gently in salted water until firm enough to slice cleanly. Overcooking made them tough and grainy, ruining the delicate texture that made this dish special. Sliced brains went into hot bacon fat in cast-iron skillets, browning lightly to develop deeper flavors. This browning added complexity, creating rich tastes that made the dish satisfying rather than bland. Beaten eggs poured over the warming brains created a scramble, combining familiar flavors with rich creaminess. The eggs bound everything together while adding comfort that made children willing to try unfamiliar ingredients. Farm families ate this during spring lambing season when fresh brains were available and protein essential for dawn to dusk outdoor work. The combination provided sustained energy through morning chores and field work. The scramble cooked quickly, creating golden curds appealing even to skeptical family members. The aroma of bacon fat, eggs, and brains convinced hesitant eaters to clean their plates. Austrian-American communities maintained this tradition longer than other groups because it connected them to Old World customs while serving practical farm needs. The Great Disappearance. What happened to America's brain food culture wasn't some gradual shift in taste preferences or slow evolution of dietary habits. It was a complete and dramatic cultural transformation that happened so quietly and efficiently that most people didn't notice until these dishes had vanished entirely from American tables, leaving only fading memories in the minds of older generations who remembered a different food culture. The decline began in earnest during the 1960s when meat processing started centralizing into massive industrial facilities located hundreds of miles from the urban centers where most Americans lived and shopped for their daily food needs. Small neighborhood butcher shops that had reliably supplied fresh organs for decades suddenly couldn't compete with supermarket chains that offered greater convenience and lower prices on familiar cuts of meat. Fresh brains required skilled butchering techniques and immediate sale before spoilage set in, making them completely unsuitable for the new industrial food system that prioritized shelf life and standardization over traditional variety and specialized knowledge. When slaughterhouses moved far from consumers, organs were simply discarded rather than preserved for retail sale. Cultural attitudes shifted even faster than supply chains as Americans became more prosperous after World War II and could afford to be selective about their food choices in ways their grandparents never could have imagined during leaner times. Brain dishes gradually became associated with poverty and desperation rather than traditional cooking wisdom and resourceful family management. Television programming fundamentally changed American expectations about what prosperity should look like in the modern kitchen. The new ideal featured convenience foods, familiar proteins, and meals that looked like magazine advertisements rather than the practical, from-scratch cooking that had sustained previous generations through much harder times. Restaurant menus quietly removed organ meat dishes rather than deal with customer complaints or spend time explaining unfamiliar ingredients to diners who expected familiar options and wouldn't tolerate anything that challenged their comfort zones or required culinary education to appreciate properly. BSE concerns in the 1990s delivered the final devastating blow to any remaining brain consumption in America, even though American beef had never been significantly affected by mad cow disease, and the actual health risks were minimal. The mere mention of brain tissue and neurological disorders was enough to make consumers avoid these products completely, regardless of their actual safety record or traditional importance in American food culture. Food safety regulations became increasingly strict and standardized, making it extremely difficult for small producers to continue offering organ meats that required specialized handling, storage, and liability insurance. Health departments imposed requirements that made brain sales impractical for most retailers who couldn't justify the costs for such a small market segment. The accumulated knowledge disappeared along with the declining demand, as butchers who knew proper brain preparation techniques retired without passing their specialized skills to younger workers who saw no future in organ meat sales. Home cooks stopped teaching their children techniques that seemed irrelevant to modern cooking and contemporary lifestyle expectations. Immigrant communities maintained these traditional food customs longer than mainstream America, but even they gradually adapted their cooking to match American tastes and ingredient availability rather than struggle to maintain practices that seemed to embarrass their American-born children who wanted to fit in with their peers at school and work. Cookbook publishers and food magazines systematically stopped including brain recipes as editors assumed readers wouldn't attempt them, and advertisers showed no interest in promoting ingredients that had no commercial potential. The recipes disappeared from community cookbooks as church ladies and social club members switched to more popular dishes that wouldn't challenge contemporary sensibilities. Food television and popular cooking shows focused exclusively on ingredients that would appeal to mainstream audiences and generate advertiser interest. Brain dishes offered no commercial potential and created the kind of squeamishness that hurt television ratings and damaged relationships with sponsors who wanted to reach broad audiences. The transformation was so complete and thorough that most Americans today literally cannot imagine their own grandparents eating brain sandwiches for lunch or scrambled brains for breakfast. These foods now seem like artifacts from a completely different country rather than dishes that routinely sustained American families for multiple generations. Modern nutritional science has conclusively confirmed what traditional cultures always understood. Organ meats provide concentrated nutrition that muscle meat simply cannot match in terms of vitamin density, mineral content, and essential fatty acids. Yet, contemporary Americans spend billions of dollars on synthetic supplements designed to replace nutrients that brain dishes once provided naturally and inexpensively as part of normal family meals. The disappearance of brain cuisine represents much more than simple changes in food preferences or evolving dietary fashions. It marks the definitive end of an entire era when Americans understood how to use every part of the animal efficiently, waste nothing edible, and create genuinely satisfying meals from ingredients that modern cooks find challenging, unfamiliar, or completely unacceptable. If you remember your family making any of these traditional brain dishes, please share those precious memories in the comments below. Help us preserve these forgotten recipes and stories for future generations who might wonder what their ancestors actually ate and how they managed to survive and thrive during times when wasting food simply wasn't an option, and every meal had to provide maximum nutrition for minimum cost. Your memories and family stories matter far more than you might think, and they represent irreplaceable links to America's authentic food heritage that deserves to be remembered and honored.